Welcome back to Embracing New Life, and on this full episode Friday, we are diving into the entirety of our interview with AJ Schreier. And so if you haven't seen parts 1 through 4, then you're in luck. This is the full, uninterrupted interview that we had with AJ Schreier, who is a colleague of ours at New Life Resources. We hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being with us. And without any further ado, here is the episode in its entirety of our interview with AJ Schreier. Welcome back to Embracing New Life, and on today's episode we have another one of our colleagues, AJ Schreier. He's an addiction specialist who's been working at the clinic for, how many years have you been here at New Life?
Oh, that's always going to be 8, 9.
At least.
Yeah.
Yes.
So closing in on a decade.
Yeah,
closing in on a decade of time here at New Life Resources, and we're sitting down to have a discussion with him today. So welcome, AJ.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you.
Good to have you. I remember meeting you when you were in a student role.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if we're getting started here. If you could just share a little bit with us, how did you get into this area of addiction counseling?
I always tell my story is not the most captivating, entertaining as to, in addiction work, you hear a lot of testimonials. People tell their stories about, their experience. And for me, it wasn't my experience with substances that got me into it. It wasn't, mental health that brought me into counseling. It was going to counseling at a young age that brought me into all the work that I do. So I tell people that I'm a little bit different than what is kind of seen as the norm, as I become sort of my experience in those areas isn't what brought me into counseling. It was counseling that got me into everything that I do now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And at your college years, you were exploring a little bit about counseling and psychology and such. What areas did you find interesting at that point in life?
So early on, people are surprised to find this, that I almost didn't pass high school. I almost failed high school. I was not doing really well, and things started changing around. And when I went to a counselor, and that changed a lot of things for me. Uh-huh. And then when I wanted to go to school, I was looking at I want to do counseling, but my grades weren't the best. I started doing really well, I think my last semester, it's senior year. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of where it didn't matter with colleges. So I was looking at local colleges and found Waukesha County Technical College had a program where you could start doing counseling. And I was looking at the curriculum they had online, and I saw year 2, you could start doing your practicum. Huh. So if I could do 1 year of college and do well in classes, I could start counseling already my second year. Mm-hmm. But the program was in substance use, and that's really what brought my interest. Was this is something counseling I wanted to get into. This is the fastest I could get into it and start doing it. But I didn't know anything about substance use. I didn't have any of the background with the lived experience. So a lot of it then just came from the academics, reading the textbooks and learning about everything that there was from a historical part of it to the theories and how to work with those with substance use. But it was really diving right into academics, and then second year, 19 years old, doing counseling with 12-year-old, 17-year-old kids.
And did you find a good fit?
Yeah, it was. I loved starting working with kids. It was interesting because two interesting things about that was I was so young. I was 19. Some of them were 16 years old, 17. So I think it worked a little bit because I was younger. Yeah. I could connect with. I wasn't this older counselor coming in. I think it built a little better bit of a connection. The challenging part was when you work with kids, you also work with their parents.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So sometimes I had parents who were then questioning what I could do as a counselor when I was only 19, 20 years old. So that was where, and couple that with the not having the lived experience, it was challenging
Mm-hmm.
not working with people directly, but sometimes the expectation that I would have had lived experience and that I should have been older did have people questioning whether or not I could be an effective counselor.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you've been a very effective counselor, so you're meeting those challenges as a teenager, early 20s. You've had a lot of education since that first program at WCTC.
Yeah, it was the amazing thing about coming here to New Life. And I remember when we first met and started talking that I spent, as a counselor, I focused like 8 or 9 years solely on substance use. And so that became, everything that I worked with, everything that I read about, everything that I went to trainings for was all directed at substance use. And that was a lot of good years of focusing on like one aspect of, counseling, treatment, diagnosing and all that. And then when I came here and actually started looking at mental health and other things not even related to substance use, I was definitely more of a fish out of water. I was looking at this entirely different because I spent so many years really dedicated to learning. And because, when you think about it, why was that? Because I didn't have a lot when I started. So to me, it was going out and collecting and discovering, gathering, learning as much as I could to feel like I could belong. Then realizing I didn't know much about all the other areas, mental health, families, relationships, all those other things that we talk about in the work that we do was entirely new to me because my tunnel vision was the substance use and how do I help that.
You did learn to swim real quickly. And a question that I think many people will ask is, well, how is a addictions counselor or substance abuse counselor and a mental health counselor, how are they different?
Yeah, part of it's the whole how we've made it that way. There's part of it is if you want to go get substance use, you have to go get certain training for that. There's a whole separate license for it that there was going on. If you want to do mental, like there was a lot of siloing.
Yes, it has been in the history.
Yeah, and that I think sometimes clinicians had to choose. And I mean, you're not even a clinician at the time, but as a student, you kind of had to choose which one do I want to help first, which one do I want to go work with. But there wasn't really anything that could be like, you know what, I want to do it all. So like, put me on that path. For me, it was start with substance use because that's the one I found a program that I could get into right away. And then I got into mental health because I realized there's more than going on than substance use. This is not just a stop using and everything is then good to go. There's more going on. Then you work with families, you work with marriages, you work with different populations. So I think part of the unfortunate thing is when you're a young student, like sometimes you have to choose, like, where do I want to start working versus like, hey, I'd like to just be in an office and have whoever comes in. I'd like to be able to start working with them. But because of that, when you get set on a course that has different trainings, different historical pieces of how it's viewed, with different ways people have tried to treat it or address it, then you do get introduced to ways as to why substance use is viewed differently versus why the mental health is. Like, some people are like, well, what came first? And I, it's like that chicken and egg.
Sure.
My response has always been like, something's hatched. Like we got both going on. So like, I'm gonna help address both. But sometimes there is that little bit of disagreement between different areas of, even though they're all part of counseling, a part of treatment, a part of, you can find them all in the DSM-5 to diagnose people, but there is still somewhat of some pretty thick bookmarks, I would say, dividing some of those sections.
Yes, and you've been able to bridge some of those divisions and bring it together in your work.
Yeah, it took me a little bit of time to think of it. Early on, a lot of imposter syndrome on belonging in the profession, because most of the time when I started, people would always ask me like, "Oh, well, do you have lived experience? Do you have this as well?" And I'd try and find ways to kind of brush it off because I didn't feel super comfortable with it. And then more so now, no one asks. Like people sit with me for sessions, and you know, we talk and we go through things, and those questions don't get asked anymore. I think I don't know what that is, but I just think it's either me more comfortable with how I'm doing it. But part of it is I think I brought some disruption to how sometimes things have been traditionally viewed, because I didn't come with that like bias of this is what I use or this is what got me better, that I now think this is like the way or this is what's going to work for everyone. I think looking back on how long I've been doing this, what I used to think was a flaw or a limit of mine is now more of a strength.
I agree.
That I come in with, you know, I don't have a way that it worked for me. It's not about that. It's really about trying to meet you where you're at.
Yes.
And how do I help you? And that's not always the most agreed method. I mean, some people want to say like, hey, if you do this program, you work this way, and you do that, this is going to be
Success.
a guaranteed way. This is going to be a success. For me, success isn't trying to change someone. It's not trying to get them to be in a certain place. I don't even look at success as like what I necessarily do. I think success is like who I am when I show up every day for that person. You know, non-judgmental, you know, checking my biases at the door, creating that safe space for whatever you're dealing with, that you can come talk to me, and that judging or that disappointment's not going to speak from either my words or my nonverbals. So I like disrupting now. I think
You're a disruptor.
Yeah, I use it more as this is to change, because I think we all have to look at, we have to see where things have been done wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like, or things, what we thought we knew before isn't exactly what we are aware of now. There's things like even how we talk about people, or how the language that we use is something that I cover a lot, where this used to be okay, or we used to think this was normal, but now we have to change that. Like that's not okay. That's stigmatizing. That's harmful. But being able to recognize that, and it's opportunity for growth. You know, I think
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I worry. You know, when I do clinical supervision, and I'm working with counselors, I worry when a counselor thinks like they've got this. Like, we talk about clients when they say they've got this, but also like we have to worry about professionals who think like I've got this, or I don't need anything else to learn. Like, oh, I've gone through that. Like, to me, one thing I love about this profession is you can always continue to learn.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's some that struggle to do that, but for me, it's you know, I don't think I've run out of books to watch, people to talk to, like things to listen to, and it's. But then I change from that. Like my approach becomes different. I say how I was as a counselor at 19 is vastly different than now when I'm 40. Because I'm not the same counselor, and I'm grateful for that.
You're still the disruptor.
I am, yeah, more so, yeah.
That's a good thing. Yeah, we get tunnel vision so quickly that it's good to force yourself to see things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So if I were to see your name in a professional setting, you have a lot of letters behind your name.
Yeah, that's part of the whole. You have to do. Just keep getting more stuff.
Can you share with us some of the areas of study, some your degrees, your license, etc.? Yeah.
So let's go with education, because I'm always grateful for the education I've gotten, because I took it for granted in high school, but I loved my schooling, where you know I went and I got an associate's degree in substance use, and that was got me in the door. And then when I was going back for my bachelor's degree, I decided to get it in psychology and human services. So then it was more of understanding the human services and the dynamics and systems, and psychology was so much about like what was going on up in here. And then when I wanted to get more into mental health is when I went for my master's degree in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like that I kind of, in my education, did a little bit of a menu of different areas. I didn't just say only this, but it was dive into the human services aspects, psychology, counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And my alcohol and drugs background really got me into it with the start. And then that led to, of course, if I wanted to work with more people, I had to get more licenses, because when I only have substance use, that's the only one I could work with.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went for my LPC, licensed professional counselor,
Mm-hmm.
and that got me more into like the mental health, and got more into, working in. I started seeing more families, more couples, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That dynamic is a whole nother one you could talk about, which is amazing. And then this sounds really weird for being like a person in their 40s, but I did realize like there was going to be a time where I wasn't going to do all the counseling that is happening now. Like as I continue my career, there's going to be a point where like I'm no longer doing this, and that got me to want to do clinical supervision,
Mm-hmm.
which was wanting to work with other counselors who are going to be in my spot or in the area that we're doing when I'm gone. So I started to want to work with counselors and help them work with their licensures, and it's been, over the years, it's been a lot of different counselors that I've given supervision hours for, signed off for their licenses, and that was a really good point in realizing like that's what I wanted to make sure I also left behind when it comes time to no longer do this. Now I think I could be doing this till I'm like 80, but just the idea that I wouldn't be here forever. And there's two other certifications I want to talk about because it doesn't get addressed enough. Is that I also became interested in gambling, and as a result, I received my International Certified Gambling, and I do clinical consultation for gambling as well, because that was an area that became very interesting to me. So those two certifications people don't notice those as much as the licenses, but they are things that I wanted to go for to highlight the need to help those impacted by gambling.
And if we could just take a look at that for just a moment, because gambling, we just got done with March Madness here. Sports gambling has become so normative, and most people report that they always win more than they lose. When is gambling a problem?
Yeah, I like talking about gambling stuff because it's so, I call it hidden in plain sight, because it's there, we see it, we don't deny it. It's very big in culture nowadays. It's big, even you see it in advertisements, commercials, you see it all over the place, but it's not as easy to see when someone's having a problem with gambling. In other areas there can be sometimes more clues about it, right? Someone who's really intoxicated and shows up to work, like if you're showing up to work and you can smell alcohol on you, or it looked like you were out the night before and you aren't looking the best, like right away that could signal to us like, okay, maybe there's an issue here, maybe there's a problem. To the extent we don't know, but that at least is like a sign that maybe something is going on here. You can't tell if someone just came into work and lost a significant sum of money, or if they all of a sudden don't have the amount of money to pay for rent, or pay for, or they just lost all their savings account for the family. There's no telltale signs. You could be participating in gambling and not know the person next to you just lost such a huge sum, or they lost an amount of money that is impacting them. When it comes down to the question of when it's a problem, I tell people, and I do this in my trainings, that don't get caught in the money factor. When people hear about losing money, people get sort of taken back by it. So if I tell you, hey, this person lost $10,000 last night gambling, people might do the whole like, whoa, their eyes get really big, or they, like they make those comments. But $10,000 doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem, because we don't know what 10,000 means to that person.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we also don't want to go the opposite, where someone goes, oh, they only lost $50. Like, to someone that's no big deal, but to someone else, $50 could be like a really big deal.
Most
Yes.
definitely. Yeah.
So if we tie this into like the substance use and gambling piece, I sometimes encourage people to not get stuck on the substance or the amount lost, but what impact is that having on the person?
Yes.
How
How does
does-
it interfere?
Yeah, how is it interfering with with life, with functioning?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of impact is it having? Because sometimes we hear amounts and we jump to a conclusion. People hear like, oh, they're drinking this much, well, they must have an alcohol problem, when there is no formula to say you drink this much this often, that now this equals you have a problem. Same with gambling. So for me, it's always, I don't let the amount catch me off guard, or immediately jump to you must have a problem because you did this or you have this. But what does that mean to you? What kind of impact does that have? What is the behavior around that substance or around the gambling? That tells me a lot more of what's going on with that person.
Mm-hmm. Someone mentioned to me recently one of their siblings was in some pretty deep trouble, and their solution was they just have to stop it. Why doesn't that work?
Yeah, I get it. Family members are desperate, loved ones are desperate. It's sort of like to me, like a tornado going on, and there's just sort of like a plea that this just needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And if that can go away, things would be much better. It's not that easy for it to just go away. There's a lot of factors going on that make it more difficult. And each, I've worked with, this is where I don't get into, it's necessarily all about the substance or the behavior, because for some people, marijuana is going to be really hard for them to stop. For someone else, it's going to be, opioids. For someone else, it's going to be stimulants or gambling. Like, there isn't the same for everyone. But for different substances, there are things that make it more challenging. With opioids, the withdrawals, it's the flu times 1,000. After a while, it's not the pleasure that's keeping it going. It is more so the avoiding the excruciating withdrawals that leads to that continued cycle.
Yes.
Where someone's not using because like, oh, this is really fun, this is really great, but now it's because if I don't use,
It's horrible.
like
Yeah.
I feel like I'm gonna die. It's gonna be miserable. And also we look at alcohol. Alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not always safe to say just stop drinking. Alcohol withdrawal can be deadly.
Yes.
So you don't want to necessarily just say to someone, hey, we'll stop drinking, because there's people who, if they do, that could be a significant health risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I want them to go seek medical care to make sure that like this is being addressed appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the whole just stop, but I remember, this is talking about school. This is a great tie-in. I remember a class. I can't think of the name of the class, but it was all about, and I don't know if other schools had this. I think this was in my substance use one. But the one class was, we all picked a behavior that we were doing daily, that we had to choose to stop. And you were gonna have to stop for the rest of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
And every week we would do things like, we would log cravings and urges, we would do journaling. There's a couple things we would learn about like what would help manage that. But here was the thing that was amazing. This teacher, I remember she said this, there's no one that ever said they stopped day one and they never returned to that behavior again, or that they didn't struggle to stop it in the first place,
Mm.
that no one ever walks out of there being like, hey, I stopped day one. And that was so, and it wasn't anything, it was pick something. It was,
Yes.
it could have been listening to music. It could have been, maybe it was like having a drink of wine, or maybe it was working out.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Caffeine.
it was, yeah, it was caffeine, but it was pick one thing in your life
Yeah.
that you do every day. And we're just going to say, we're going to stop and see how hard that is.
It's funny you mentioned that. I ran into a former student of mine. She probably was in the class 15 years ago. We had that activity, and her activity was knitting.
Oh,
I do not know if knitting is an addiction. She commented to me that was such a transformational activity for her, because she had been of the mindset, you just stop.
yeah.
And to this day, as she knits, she just has a sense of compassion for those who are involved in something that is dangerous to them.
And part of that is, I think, not even just we're not even tying into all the other trauma factors, mental health factors,
Correct, right.
family issues. We're not even talking about the biochemistry going on with substances, but just something that people are doing often, almost daily, to just all of a sudden be stop, you don't do it. Like that's change. That's not just easy.
We humans can change, but it's a challenge.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And these activities often are something that bring us comfort or soothing. When that's removed, we have to find another way to take care of ourselves.
Right. I remember I heard a great quote the other day, which I really like. This one was, like to the person engaging in some behavior, they don't look at it as like bad. Like to them, this is a behavior that makes sense. Like they're doing something that is serving some purpose. That we might look at it as, well, that's harmful or that's negative, but to that person, they're either seeing it or experiencing it in some way that, like, this is having some benefit. It could be a protective factor, it could be self-preservation, it could be just a way of getting out of something. As a counselor, for me, it's not to look at a behavior as like this is good or bad, or this is a negative or positive. But for me, part of it is to get into like, what is the purpose of this? What function does it have? What is it providing this person? Because normally, when you dive into that, I don't find much wrong with what they are searching for. You know, is that they're searching for some peace, so they are looking for some escape from some traumatic thing. Like, I don't see that there's anything wrong with that, but there are ways in which people have tried to do that, or it's the only way that they've known. And to me, it's, if we can look at what that is, then we have a much better insight into, okay, like, how can we actually really get to healing? How can we really get to a place of comfort that also doesn't have as much destruction with it?
Yes.
So I really try to avoid, looking at the behavior, substances, gambling is, a negative, bad. Because I think when you villainize the behavior, you can easily attach that to the person.
Yeah.
And we can say how much we dislike something, but how quickly does that become to the person who is engaging in it or displaying it? And for me, I don't want them to ever think that way, that I see them as being a bad person or being terrible. I think part of it is they're doing something that is serving some purpose.
Yeah.
Is helping them. A really great way of looking at it was, I didn't hear this till I got into more of like harm reduction psychotherapy, is when people have said drugs saved my life. And to a lot of us, that's like, well, wait a minute, we're here to talk about how bad drugs are and how harmful they are, like how destructive they are. But when I started hearing people talk about that, I started to understand in moments that substance use was the only thing that got them through what they were going through. Like, whatever it was, they didn't know any other way out or through except the substance help. Now, did that change in time? Did it become something else? Was it different now with more consequences or more impacted? Absolutely. But in those moments, that person didn't know how they were going to survive without it. And I I recognize that, and I can appreciate that. But if I also come with the whole drugs are terrible and what are you doing, that person's going to defend that, especially
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
if it has been a protective thing for them from something even
And
scary.
if they have no other way
Yeah.
to try to meet that need or get that comfort or whatever they're pursuing. So we can take a look at moral issues around various behaviors, but that doesn't really help us change.
No, and we've talked about this a good amount, is shame, words of shame, enabling, get thrown around a lot in addiction work. It more so than I hear in a lot of other areas, but there's still some people who think shaming people with their substance use will create change.
And what's your observation about that?
No, I mean, I see shame is disconnection, and I don't see people get better when they feel less connected to themselves, to others, to spirituality, to any of those things. I say addictions thrive more in isolation.
Exactly.
I say, what is this the addiction want? More involved or less involved? Does it want it more in the dark? Does it want it more in the light? So to me, and here's the truth too. If shaming people did heal, we'd have a lot more people heal. I mean, that's to me, like, I look at people who come into our services, counseling, treatment. They've already probably been hurt.
Yep.
Plenty.
Yes.
I don't think any more hurt will heal.
No.
I don't think about it. I can't think of anyone who said to me, AJ, I think I need to be hurt more for me to get better. I think some people think they deserve hurt. Like they think they've done something wrong, where they think they deserve punishment. They deserve to be treated bad. But I've never had someone come to me and say, you know what, if I could just get another dose of pain, I think I'll get better. We shaming people, it's not one that we really need to send someone to go get some like that happens a lot, unfortunately, from a individual side, self-shame, from others, from culture, from society. Like there are things where this is happening pretty frequently, where this is not healing people.
Right.
This is not treating anyone. This is not encouraging people to seek help and get care by. And we don't see this in any other profession. I mean, we don't. I always, as a disruptor, I always use my experience with having type 1 diabetes and the care I get, because one of the things that interested me early on was people were like equating diabetes and addiction, so I was always fascinated by that. But I'll tell you, we treat other things a lot differently than we treat addiction. I don't have doctors shaming me to try to get me to take my insulin, or to, I'm greeted with like warmth, with care, encouragement. If I had someone say, hey, I want to go to my doctor's appointment, I'd have a few people who'd be willing to take me. So I think part of it is, if we could treat people who struggle with substances, gambling, other addictions, the way we treat other things, we'd be a lot better path towards healing versus what shaming has done already.
Shaming inhibits, shuts down, covers over, doesn't bring healing. But some would say at this point, well, yeah, but diabetes is a physical illness, and addiction, it's not. That's a choice.
Yeah, and we see that with mental health too. That's a
depression. That's a choice.
That's the and part of me is who really, like, who chooses this. I don't know anyone that says they want this, that this is what they growing up, this is what I wanted to experience or go through. Like, I'll never hear someone that this is what the choice is. Does choices play a part? Absolutely. You know, you have type 1 diabetes like I do, someone's got depression, like there's still choices to be made. You know, it's not that we cannot make choices, but there are a lot of factors that are in play that we don't even realize. You know, that's where I like the whole, it's not just, you know, to me it's, you know, mental, physical, you know, there's generational stuff, there's a whole combo of how we like view someone, that all these factors is one pretty incredible living being that is going on. You know, like to me, I think of it as like all the interesting parts in a machine, and like you take even one little part out, and that machine can change, or it could not even function anymore. And then imagine that being a human body. And we can't just open it up like a printer and take out a piece and do that. But it's so fascinating. That's why I think I liked getting into psychology. I liked getting into substance use, because now you're adding in a substance and how that affects it. Gambling is a behavior that you're not putting a substance is, but it has some of the same effects, same brain chemistry.
That brain is impacted the same way,
Yeah.
So some would say, but if we think that it's got physical, or if it's a disease, well then you're no longer responsible for it.
Yeah.
And you just described with diabetes, there's still a responsibility of how do I care for myself given I have this challenge.
Yeah, that's where it comes down to, is saying acceptance is not, I kind of look at acceptance isn't like, another word of it is surrender. Here's what I look at. I remember this conversation I had with someone who you know, she was a fighter, and she was having a hard time in treatment, and we were talking with her, and that's when you kind of bring in the team of people to say, hey, like there's 3 or 4 of you. We used to call them treatment meetings, where there'd be 3 of us, 4 of us, you know, like counselor, clinical supervisor, maybe like the director of the program, but kind of want to talk with this person that like, hey, we're concerned or we're worried, things are kind of getting a little bit worse, and we just want to get ahead of this before something more could happen. And I remember she was a fighter, and she was talking about it too, and she was like, you could really tell she was in a spot where like she didn't want to give up. You know, she didn't want to like feel like she had to defeat. And I remember telling her, like, I'm not asking you to not fight, I'm not asking you to give up, but I tried to talk with her about like, it's just picking the right fight, like choosing where to put all that, because she was always going to be that way. Asking her to not be her, what would that do? Like that
Won't work.
won't do anything. So like to me, and you know what I learned this from was this was where physical therapy taught me this. So this is a great lesson. Is I remember when I went to physical therapy for my shoulder, my massage therapist would work with me, and she would have to tell me to stop fighting her because of the pain. I would try to like fight it, and she told me, you know, like I needed to like let go and relax. And part of me wasn't like, I'm not giving up, like, and just saying I'm powerless, but part of it was having to really realize like what I had to do in order to heal. It was to not just not be a part of it at all, but part of it was to not resist her, not try to tighten up, but I had to work on how can I relax? How can I trust this person to take care of me? So to me, it's not about surrendering where it's like we can't do anything, we have no part in this. This person will always have the most important part in this.
Yeah.
Like this is where I kind of go back to me, the expert in the room is always the client that I'm working with. And they've got to be the ones that have, you know, these choices that they have to make and things that they have to go through. And I'm transparent with clients too, because sometimes, I'm sure you two have had where sometimes a client wants you to tell them what to do. You know, they're and I get this, talk about substance use, talk about families. I get this a lot where parents are like, do we kick them out? Do we let them sit in jail? what do we do? Tell us what we should do. And I'll always say this: I never tell people what they should do. I think it's unfair if we were to say to someone, well, you go do this, when we have what impact does that have on us? If I tell a family, leave your kid in jail, I'm not the ones answering the calls. I'm not the one who's got the kids saying they don't feel safe in there. They're worried about what's going to happen. I don't have to deal with that. It's pretty, to me, unfair to say, hey, go make this decision. I'm kind of wipe my hands clean of it. My goal is to say, what are your options here? So your kid's in jail. Let's look at what the options are. What would that be like for you when they call? What would you do? Yeah, how would you handle that? If we got a mom and dad, how would you both handle that? If you decide to bail them out, what would occur? What would you plan on doing? How would that look? Like I'm in it to process options, because I believe if you give someone options, give someone education, you help people see things that, if I truly believe in autonomy, that someone can make the choice that does serve their best interests and their well-being, that doesn't rely on me saying, hey, I know which one it is.
Yeah.
I'll share with people at times, there are very often many ways it could go well.
For sure.
But none of them are going to be problem free.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want people to think like it just ends there with this decision.
Yes.
Like even if you go back to the jail one, if you leave someone in jail, it doesn't just end there. If you bail them out, it doesn't just end there. Like that's where I don't want people to think it's a simple to do or not to do.
Yeah.
And that solves everything. But part of it is like helping to play this out. Like what happens here? What follows along with this? Like this isn't is this a big decision? It is a big decision, but also it's not one that just closes the door and ends things. Like it's just, it leads to, that's going to end as soon as you make that decision. It's going to start to have the implications.
And then the next. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to me, it's not about trying to be able to make the right decisions for people, because I don't even want to say I know that.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that. But part of it is, how can I help the person to think of their choices, look at their decisions, what resources do they need? Hey, what's it going to be like when you get that call? How are you going to manage that? How do you anticipate that would be for you? You know, and then trying to help them, how would you cope with that? How would you deal with that? I'm not just helping them with that one issue is not really what, to me, counseling is a part of. But it's a bigger part of overall helping them to improve on some things, like thinking things through, decision making, and coping with things beyond just this situation.
Well, and in that, you're moving people towards agency, right? So you're helping them see that they're an active participant in their narrative, you know. And I think along with that, I think part of the education piece is helping them to also understand that there's a lot of just conditioning psychologically that they've encountered from the point that they were born to now that is fighting against, you know, new behaviors being established. And so to the point earlier, it just takes an incredible amount of time and energy for behaviors to change, you know. So encouraging them, yes, you do have agency in your story and you can make choices, but also encouraging them that's going to take a lot of work, just because your brain has a way it likes to operate, and a lot of that a lot of that processing is in the subconscious, and you have very limited access to the way it operates. So with time and intentional effort, you can move towards, you know, better decision making. But yeah, agency is just so foundational to people owning their stories and living well.
Yeah. Which is why I love being able to work in places where you can work with people for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I've been fortunate where, you know, like here at New Life Resources and some of the other places where I've been able to work with people for years. I mean, I've known some clients and individuals for a long time. I've been restricted in some settings to you got 30 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got 60, maybe 90. You know, maybe
Yeah.
maybe we'll give you 90. And that's hard as a counselor because
Mhm.
you can definitely tell like your ability shifts with that sort of
Mhm.
limit. And there are times where would I have liked to have done a different style or approach? Hands down. I'll
Yes.
admit that. Do I think that would have been the best? But also I can't apply that when I only have 30,
Mhm.
60, 90 days.
Arbitrary numbers, but given any specific case.
Yeah, because if I only got someone for 30 days, I probably have to get into a little bit more solution focused. I probably have to get into more of
Mhm.
what's going on from like that human services case manager of like, you know, where they're gonna go, where they're gonna live, how they're, you know, what they're gonna
Yeah.
do with like work. Like that
Mhm.
is a much different approach than here when I sometimes have had someone for a long time. Like
Mhm.
that allows so much to occur when you get years to work with
Mhm.
someone.
And what I've observed in addiction treatment is the needs, the basic human needs we all have. When those needs are being met in a healthy way, they can much more effectively manage whatever the addiction process has been.
Mm-hmm.
But when those needs aren't met, as you were describing earlier, it's real probable we're going to have lapses or relapses even, because that's the strategy they've known to try to meet those needs. The needs don't go away just because we say, oh, this isn't a healthy thing to do. The needs are real.
Yeah, it's one of the other quotes about the behaviors. One of the negative behavior is a function of my unmet need.
Yes.
And even though it's got the word negative in it, but it goes to show that there is something they're not getting. And that's where I think a lot of the part of what I like to hear with like some students and younger clinicians is they bring up, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think sometimes we forget about some of that stuff where people, this happens a lot with substance users. People will look at like, if you just stop the substance use, everything will be taken care of.
Yeah.
You just stop that. And remember, assuming positive intentions, it's coming from a place of there's desperation going on and people are just hoping the tornado goes away. But when the tornado goes away, I say there's a lot of disaster caused. And let's also be clear, I don't think it's just the one person. You got family dynamics going on, you got relationship dynamics going on that, you know, I sometimes ask families, okay, if this behavior was gone today, everything's good. and you know sometimes they try to hide it. They try to be like, yeah, it'd be great, but you know there's always other things going on. And we see that too. People who do, if their goal is abstinence and they do get abstinence, they do maintain sobriety, everything isn't just better.
No.
Things are a lot harder. Because now it's not that I have money issues, but now I have money issues being sober. Feeling all the feelings that I haven't felt. And like, I always tell people there's no gold card of sobriety that you can just, you know, cash in with problems to be like, well, I thought I just needed to get sober and everything was going to be okay. Yeah. People still have problems, issues, finances.
Yeah.
And people look at this too when it comes to, if they would just stop, everything would be better. It's hard to say that to someone who doesn't have a home right now. Like, okay, we'll stop using, and then where's the home? Where's the house? Sometimes people who don't have a house are using just to get through being on the street. So just to say to someone, if you take care of that, and that's why there's a lot of things that come with the more, you know, housing, food, you know, taking care of basic rights should be the first step that we take before we try to enact all this change. That we don't put sobriety and abstinence as a gatekeeper to these things. That we don't say, hey, once you get sober, now you can do this. It's, you know, you realize maybe if this person had food, had a place to live, that there's probably a better chance they could get sober, or they could reduce their use, or they could maybe have less effects. But that's not always agreed upon. There's not just like treatment wise, but society wise, where it's
as well. Yeah,
there's a disagreement on what people think should come first. And part of me, I struggle with not seeing, like, if someone's basic human needs are not being met, I don't know how we would expect some of these really grand changes that are difficult for people who, by the way, do have those things. I don't work with people who just struggle with finances, or I have people who have plenty of finances, who have a roof over their head, who have a job. They still struggle with addiction issues. So having that is no guarantee. But also, like, it's really hard for someone, like, they're in survival mode. You know, they're just trying to get through how do you work on transformation? We're just trying to get through day by day. We see that in trauma. We see that in substance use, where when someone's stuck in that, they can't, it's hard to even think past this next hour, this next night.
And to that point, I remember watching a TED Talk. It's been many years now, but I think the guy was talking about how Portugal, I believe it was Portugal, was doing their people that had been incarcerated for drug-related issues, how they were doing it when they got out. They were connecting them with communities and a job right away, and they found greater success because people were supported, they felt valued, they had purpose in life. You know, and so, as you say, to be able to meet those basic needs, and then also come alongside them and help them meet the needs that are so deeply human, to know and be known, and to love and be loved, and to connect with others. It has a powerful impact on people.
And there's some programs like that in Milwaukee. One, Partners in Hope with Community Warehouse, where upon release from incarceration, in a community, job training, providing them with clothes for an interview. But something even that simple can really make a difference, because if our needs aren't met, we're going to have to find some way to tolerate that pain.
Yeah, we have at Community Medical Services, where I am a clinical director, we have a program that works with individuals incarcerated and released. A lot about that, but here's the thing that stands out about that is they started getting them some backpacks filled with, like, basic toiletries. Because sometimes these individuals get out at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Like, the release times are scary, because what's open at the time, but also they're just getting out. They have nothing. One of my coworkers and friends said it best, was how bad would it be is if this person gets locked up again because they stole deodorant or a toothbrush from a place, just because they don't have toiletries. So, like, part of that was getting a backpack made with, like, some basic toiletries and things that they could start with, because we don't want, that's what someone's going to get locked up again for. Things that we take for granted is, to someone, could be a difference maker in
for sure,
you know, not going back.
Let me change focus just a moment here.
For sure.
So, it's a common question I am asked is, I've got a loved one who's in an addictive process, whatever the object of the addiction is. What should I do?
One of my questions that I ask a lot more now than I used to was, are you getting any kind of counseling or help? Because I really, and New Life, I have to say, New Life helped me with that, because a lot of the places that I've worked, my main individual that I was providing care for was the person struggling with substance use. You know, I worked in, you know, group home, halfway house, residential, where that's the person. Now, I worked with families, because families were a part of it, and they would come. But it wasn't until working with New Life that I began to experience working. If that person's not going to come get help, who then shows up to see me? And that's the family member. So I'm not even working with the person, but now it's the family member who's saying, hey, my husband won't stop drinking or my son won't stop using. They don't want to come to counseling, but I'm here. Now they're not my client. The person who is using a substance or engaging in behavior is not mine, and now it's the family member that is my client. This is where I really loved, family systems work and marriage and family therapy, and looking at this from a systems perspective versus just this one client that I'm working with. So part of me always asks, like what kind of help are you getting for this going on? And they sometimes think that that's why they're here to see me, is so that I can help them to fix the other.
Yeah.
So they think I'm going to come up with some amazing, like, this is how you stop it, this is how you get rid of it. But like I kind of be transparent from the beginning that like if you're here, and even if a couple were here or a family were here, I'm not here to fix anyone. Like, I'm gonna make that clear. I'm not here to fix this. I laugh sometimes when someone comes in and they'll say this. They'll be like, this person, they're an addict. They can't stop using, and we're all here today to support this, and whatever we can do by today to take care of this, let us know. Like they're thinking I'm gonna get this done in one session.
About it. No problem.
With everything, but I really started working with families to try to help understand that they have been impacted, they have been a part of it in some way or another, that they need their own support and they need their own help. In a way, they need their own recovery.
Yes.
It might not be recovery from the substance, but it might be recovery from a loved one's substance. And I really, really appreciated the work by Michael Barnes, who he was a guest on my podcast, and we talked about, he wrote a book called When the Solution Becomes a Problem.
Yes.
When you just try to fix things and it creates more problems. And it comes from a very family systems dynamic. But he really dives deep into his book about how you can see the trauma that happens in family systems, because all of a sudden, like when they're not home by curfew, what happens to the family? What do they start to experience? And he really dives into like the trauma response of like they feel their hands get tightened or their heart races because now it's a minute past curfew. How the phone would ring and they would worry that it's a police officer telling them they found someone dead, that or if they tried to set boundaries, if they tried to not give money or not bail someone out, that if there was a challenge to that, what would they be experiencing? So he really talks about how the system goes through a lot of trauma and how that impacts all of it. And when I talk with some people about that and what they've experienced, I just try to highlight what it's been like for them. And it's one of the greatest questions I like in therapy, which is like, what's it like to be you?
Yes.
And what is that like when you say no to giving money and then that happens? What's it like for you when you set a curfew and they're 10 minutes late? I'm trying to get them to like recognize, bring some awareness to how do they feel. And part of that is they need some help in dealing with that. They need some healing themselves, because this is very much a trauma response.
Yes.
So I used to think, my 19, 20, 21-year-old self, that if things got better with the person who was using substances or gambling or whatever the case, even mental health, if things were improved, okay, now the family would be better. But after all these years, you just realize that it's no guarantee of it.
Sometimes when the person with the active addiction moves towards sobriety, it makes things worse in the relationships around them.
Yeah.
The system has been accustomed to the drama, whatever it is. Now it's different. So the goals when you're working with family of someone who's involved in an addictive process, what are some of the goals that you might have for the family members? Since we've taken off the table, change the other.
Yeah. Part of it, I mean, it comes down to a lot of the things usually with I would say it's just substance use, but I almost don't want to say just substance use, because I think with mental health, with gambling, substance, anything, a lot of a big part is like psychoeducation, and we're learning a lot more about what's going on here.
Develop realistic expectations.
Yeah, like we might think substance use is this. We might think this is a moral failing. So maybe I have to talk a little bit about like what's going on more with that, brain chemistry, what's happening with this, or even mental health. Someone who thinks like, oh, they're depressed, they just need to like pull up their boots and they just got to fight through it. And part of it's like giving more psychoeducation on like what is this that we're really dealing with here. Like we say substance use, we say gambling, we say mental health, but really there's a lot more that's really going on here. But let's make sure we at least can work towards a common understanding of what this is. Because you realize when people are working under different understandings, it gets really complicated.
Sure. Yes.
Sure.
If one person thinks it's this person says it's this person looks at it from this, how they see it, how they think it needs to be addressed, how we solve it, are just all different things. So part of it is getting to a spot of like understanding what this really is, what's really going on. And from there, then it's really diving into, with a family or a couple, because I see a lot of couples too, is it's part of when we do the work here, this is, when I say we, this is we as a family, or we as a couple. We have to realize like this is a system that's going to be involved, not well, if this one person does this, everything's going to be good. So part of it's processing too, like, okay, if this person were to do this, how does that affect other people? Is everyone, like, I like trust. Oh my goodness, talk about an area of trust with substance use. But I hear this a lot from families that I just want them to be honest. Like, if they just told the truth, everything would be okay. And first of all, everyone lies. Like, let's just get that out of the way. Not that it's like it happens. I mean, it's a fascinating topic to talk about, like lying. I like talking about it, but I ask families, okay, you said you just want the truth. So this person came home, they had a real stressful day, and they go, hey, I'm just trying to be honest here. I've wanted to drink all day. I really struggle with that. Hey, how does that work for you? And I'll ask all of them, how do you respond to that? How do you deal with that? And it doesn't need to happen for me to see how people will like, oh, well, I guess he wants to drink. There's anger, there's upset, or, oh, I guess he doesn't care about us. Oh, like all of a sudden it was
fear.
Yeah, there's fear going on there. There's judgment. There's assumptions too. Like, just because I had a thought to drink doesn't mean I necessarily I'm really wanting it. They may have spent their whole day making sure they didn't drink. But part of that I talk with families about is we say we just want the truth. Then when the truth comes out, how are we with that? Does that then become like, oh, that's great, thanks for sharing, and we want to support you? That's part of understanding sometimes the things that families think they want. Not that trust is bad, but part of it is this is more than just trust itself. It's the process of trusting.
Yes.
This isn't just about saying the right thing but this is about the process of communication, where people can say things and maybe they didn't say it the best way, but then this doesn't lead to another argument where someone's kicked out again, or someone says a really harmful thing. Like, families have to be able to deal with problems in situations. It doesn't mean, once again, just because someone's mental health, substance use, gambling, anything else, pornography, sex addiction stuff. We didn't really dive into that, but that's another issue. Like, just because that stops doesn't mean family marriage issues, you're now just absolved from that.
No.
Like,
They don't just go away.
yeah.
No. We need safety to have closeness. And one of the things I'll work with families in this kind of scenario is, how do we establish safety, knowing that it's never completely safe? Many times people want to have a risk-free relationship. Unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
But we don't want to be dichotomous. Since it can't be perfect, it's horrible, unsustainable. Can't handle it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what we're helping families do is to learn how to love and be loved with imperfect people in an imperfect scenario, because that's the best we got.
And that's hard with. I see that with addictions, really harder more than anything, because a lot of times a return to gambling, substance use, pornography, that becomes usually like a whole nother way than if someone were to talk to me about, well, they were anxious again, or they struggled. Not that to minimize, but I think with substance use, what I see is such a more all or nothing, where either there is, here's all my trust and have it, but then all of a sudden one thing happens and it goes, you lost it all.
Dichotomous.
Then you said the right thing, or it went away. You have it all. It just becomes, that's a really hard way to have a relationship.
And frankly, that isn't honest.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of what we've talked about before, about trying to enter into relationships non-judgmentally, with curiosity and just observing, and when we can do that, it provides more safety.
Yeah, we have to realize these, because some people go, well, when can I trust again? And they're like looking for like, hey, 1 year this, and then you can. But that's a real challenge when I've worked with family members and significant others, is there's times where it doesn't matter how long this person is sober,
right?
They may never trust them again. They can't open, they can't face that risk of vulnerability. And I've looked at it in my way. I kind of look at vulnerability as like a castle, that we have this castle built around us, and we sometimes have the walls, the drawbridges, we've got the moat around us, we've got our guards all along, and sometimes there's no threat, so what's going on, the castle's kind of thriving, doing its thing. Sometimes we may be more on guard, which means like, hey, no one's going out today, or that. But what I tell people is, you can't be, drawbridge up, you're hiding in the most secure spot there, your defense mechanisms are just across the border. You can't say, I don't want hurt coming in, but you know what, I'll let a good emotion, I'll let this come through instead. Like, you block off like everything. You can't just say, hey, send over your love, but your mistrust, your like all that, you can't send that, or we're gonna defend that. No, you attack anything that starts approaching. So I tell people a lot that when you are looking for the desirables in this relationship, you are having to let your guard down, you are having to let the bridge open, you are having to tell your defense to not attack. You have to let yourself be vulnerable, which is good because that allows the emotions and the experiences that we want to have come through, but it does create a risk that something else could also come through.
So sometimes we're working with that individual. How can I tolerate that risk? Because nobody's perfectly safe.
Yeah.
And yes, certain times some people are less safe than others, but we never get the safety of perfection. That's just not possible.
Yeah.
I'll share with people also around trust. It's not all or nothing, and it's much more than just they earned it. You can never truly earn trust. They did it okay 1,000 times. That doesn't tell me what 1,001 will be.
Right.
So there's always that risk of granting the gift of trust. The risk I take to try to be able to connect with the other.
I find a lot of people don't also, they're thinking they're earning trust, but they're almost like looking at it from two very different approaches. Where someone is like, hey, I've been doing this, I've been doing that, I haven't been drinking, I haven't been using substances, I've been doing this, and to them that's like, I should be earning trust, and the other person might be like, well, that's what I'm expecting you to do.
Yeah, that's the baseline.
Yeah, like that's where, like, when you work with, families and you work with couples, that trust is so important.
Yeah.
But even knowing what it is that we're working towards, how is that? You find that people are not always on the same page. I've had kids who are like, I'm taking out the trash, I'm doing my homework, I'm doing this. Now, why are they grounded? Because they may have snuck out with the car and they got caught smoking weed, or they got in trouble. But all of a sudden they're thinking, I'm doing good with school, I'm coming home, I'm helping out, this is what should earn trust back. And then the parents have a completely different idea of what they're looking for to earn trust, but they're not talking.
They're not talking, and when we think you either trust me or don't, that's so unrealistic. We trust each other in some areas. I trust you enough to sit on the same piece of furniture with you, but I don't trust you if I need open heart surgery. And helping people recognize trust is granted, and that it is specific in areas. It's not a universal. That I found that to be helpful for people to take the risk, because I love the castle metaphor. And when you're near VCL, castles are always on a hill because it's hard to approach. And if we just stay in the castle, we don't connect. Not only is the person struggling with addiction behaviors, their needs aren't met, neither is the one in the castle.
Right. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, you've got a podcast with 120 some editions so far. What's the name of it again?
Talking Addiction Recovery podcast.
Talking Addiction Recovery. These and many related topics, I listen to it frequently. I recommend it. Check it out. It's really helpful and insightful, and just kind of sometimes pleasant to follow along in the discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Appreciate it.
Talking Addiction Recovery. Check it out. And you've a book as well?
Yeah, I don't talk about that as much. Because I wrote the book Addiction Recovery, but which is why I like the podcast more, because I've realized that, like, you just keep changing and growing. As
soon as we write, it's got dated.
And I was, and I, at the time when I wrote it, like, I've always thought about rewriting it with like an updated, because I wrote it at a time, and then I transitioned to where I really started learning more about like harm reduction psychotherapy. I started learning more about some other areas that I was really not aware of throughout my whole academic professional career. But there's just a lot of things that, in looking back at how I viewed some things, how I looked at some things, are just so not how I am today, that the book, I'm grateful that I wrote it and put into it. It does speak to the change, though, that comes in this profession, that what I thought years ago to what I think now can be different, and that's okay. I think a part of me is probably struggling with a little bit, to not feel like it's like hypocritical, or to not feel that, well, yeah, I did say that, but part of it is like that's just learning.
Totally.
Yes.
Being different. I'm glad I see things differently now than I did when I was 19. I'm glad the language I use is different now than what I used before. I'm really grateful for how I do things as a counselor now than I was. Part of me wishes I could be the counselor that I am now, back with some of the individuals I used to work with, because I just think of how much better of a counseling service they would have gotten. But that was me and the best that I could at the time.
Exactly.
And that's what we can do at this point in time. Because I'm thinking how fortunate the people that you'll be working with 10 years from now, the AJ that they'll be able to work with.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the greatest parts of counseling is when you.
Always.
I got to one of the best books that was always given to me at a young age was not a young age, but in counseling, was The Gift of Therapy. And I got to see the son of the author, who now does a lot of the work. I think it's Victor is the son, I think, because I think he was the son, I believe. But part of what he talked about at his breakout session at a conference was how when he was younger, that a lot of times we think who we are as a counselor and who we are as a person are like two entirely different people. That we kind of they're just traveling alongside, but there's a concrete barrier. There is a huge gap in between that they kind of run parallel. But what he said was, as you do this a lot longer, you realize like those two become more in sync with one another, and that's okay. Like we don't have to be afraid of that or think that we're being malpracticed because who I am. But for so long, me coming up into that, this is me as a counselor, and keep this completely aside versus this is who I am as a person outside of it. But now doing this for over 20 some years, that felt I felt seen.
Yes.
And that was okay to be like, who I am as a counselor is very much lining up with just who I am as a person.
Yes.
Still gonna do some things differently, but my compassion, my understanding, my non-judgmental. I think I realized part of what gets you through some things is like what I know about being a counselor. But it doesn't mean I'm a counselor to everyone. No. In my life.
But when you're in the role of counselor, your whole person is brought in to that process.
I like talking about that. I wish there was more talks about that, in supervision and talking about cases where we always talk about the client, the family, the couple in the room. But we can't forget that there's someone else in the room. And that we are a part of it. We might not be taking down all the data points that we ask about everyone else, but like we can't pretend that we're an outside observer. We're not observing this from a double-sided.
It is a relationship.
That we're a part of that. And it's okay to talk about that and to know it, not to say, well, nope, I'm just the counselor, as if I'm not even in the room observing things. Like what we bring into that plays a big role, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. But I think that's still missing sometimes in some of the how we approach things nowadays, from like a treatment staffing way. Like it's, well, talk about the client and what's going on. Well, what are you doing? Like what did you bring into that session? What did you bring into that today? And I think you'd probably catch some people off guard if you asked that. I know if I asked the counselor, all right, okay, I got an idea of what's going on, but what did you bring in that day? They might be like, well, I was there. So I appreciate more and more visiting that type of stuff, because
I agree.
I think we sometimes forget about that as we try to learn newer techniques, newer approaches, newer models. We learn more about the evidence-based stuff. Like we can't forget about what we always bring. I can't guarantee I bring in MI every time. I can't guarantee I bring in CBT. I can't guarantee I bring in harm reduction psychotherapy. But I know if I show up, I can guarantee I'm always a part of it. That's one thing you can always count on.
And treatment outcome research is clear that the therapeutic relationship, the counseling relationship, is critical to change process. And in order to be in a relationship, I got to be there.
Yeah.
Now I appreciate all that you're sharing right now.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
This is good stuff. Well, we really want to have you back.
For sure.
If we stay much longer, we probably have to order pizza. Thanks for sharing and giving us so much time sharing all that you have.
Yeah.
Just really appreciate the work that you're doing and all that you contribute to us here at the clinic as your colleagues. Really appreciate it, AJ.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for coming on, and thanks for being a disruptor.
Yeah, I'll be back.
All right. We're going to hold you to it.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed that full episode Friday interview with AJ Schreier. And if you're arriving to our podcast and that is the first episode that you've seen, be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, because we try to release episodes every Monday at midnight. And so our next series of podcasts that will be coming out is another interview with one of our colleagues at New Life Resources, Sarah Bogdanovich. She'll be joining us starting on Monday with the first part of her interview series. And we hope you guys are enjoying these as you're introduced to the staff at New Life Resources, and we talk through different topics related to counseling and faith. But have a great day, and see you on Monday. Embracing New Life is a production of New Life Resources, a Christian counseling clinic in southeast Wisconsin, whose aim and goal since 1976 has been to provide high-quality professional counseling, psychological, and consulting services from within a Christian framework.